Hi.
What's up?
Not much. Well, stuff is going on, but
Doing
how
this
are
outside
you?
today?
Yeah, I feel like being in the sun.
It's not a bad call. We're overcast right now in Austin. Got
Yeah, I need to get a
nice.
stand. I need to get like a tripod stand.
I know. I do too.
I need to
Gotta get.
upgrade. It's getting ridiculous.
Um, we got a lot of people joining. I don't know if folks have the context from Twitter or they just saw the live button on IG. But today, Preeti and I are going to be talking about dad bods, maybe big booties, some of the socio-cultural phenomena behind that. And we would welcome your participation. If you guys have any comments, please add them. If they're relevant, we'll be sure to include them. So, maybe Preeti, before we start opining on reasons for these things, maybe if you want to share your perception of dad bods and your perception of a female who might profess an attraction to dad bods, that might be a good start.
Yeah, personally, I'm not as acclimated with the social phenomena around this. Like, I've thought more about social phenomena around mainstream media making fatness okay. And I think it's a very similar,
Very similar.
similar
Yeah.
thing. And so, like, a couple months ago, you saw that Cosmo magazine with that obese woman, and they were saying this is okay. And it was like several other magazines and media outlets did the same thing, where like, they were portraying obese women, and they're like, this is okay. And I think that like there's a lot of things wrong with that, right? First, as a society, I think we're downgrading all of our standards.
Yeah.
And so like heroism is important for culture, for society, for humans to aspire to something that's greater than what they are today. And when you kind of remove any kind of sense of standards or heroism, I think what is there for humans to aspire to?
What do you think
Yeah.
is driving that? I mean, obviously, people's bodies have changed over the last 30 years. I actually have a theory of my own for, a commercial reason for the decline in heroism or heroism as we traditionally see it. But curious, what you might think the catalysts for that change might be, if we can agree that it exists.
The catalyst for that change. I don't know. Why don't you take a shot at it? Let me think about it.
Yeah. So I think that let's say, emergence of the digital economy has changed the nature of business to where every unit sold has a cost, and there's a functional limit on the audience that you can reach, to a digital economy where there is no real limit in terms of the amount of customers you can serve. And so every business is constantly looking to increase their user base, their customer base. But the difference in the digital world is it's a lot easier to do that. And so when you notice that there is a increase in, let's just say, eating based health disorders, or, obesity prevalence or diabetic prevalence within the population. What that means is, number one, your consumer market is changing towards being less healthy. And also there's a technological change that makes it easier for you to serve a large number of people more profitably. And so I think, this is my experience working at Google, is, if Google's looking to get another 100 million users, rather than try to find like the prettiest and smartest ones, they just want any of them. And so I think that a big reason behind this like inclusion push, inclusion being the other side of the diversity push coming from Silicon Valley, is actually the realization that if they want to scale their audiences maximally, they need to have like 100% of the population using their products.
I mean, that's definitely a one way to, I guess, look at it. It's from a very like the fact that we're consumerizing everything, and it's all about how can we grow our markets. And I guess that's one explanation. I think a lot of it just stems from like sheer laziness and
Well,
lack of culture. Like, I think like,
what I'm saying is
you know,
these things are intersecting. Is you have
yeah,
this thing going. I agree that sheer laziness, cultural decline, whatever. I think that's happening. I think in
yep,
parallel, there's an emergence of a digital economy that is taking advantage of that cultural change in this particular way, which is, accelerating the trend and openness that people have towards these body types.
yeah, for sure. And I think like, I mean, if you just look at like, I think people today don't read like mythology and culture and like religion, and like they don't see sort of like these aspirational figures that people in the past used to. Like,
Mm-hmm.
gods are there because they're very inspiring. And like, you look at these images that people drew, in ancient times, and like all of these people look very beautiful. You don't see like fat people in these images. You don't see
Mm-hmm.
like, they're very well put together. And I think as a society, we've lost touch with we've lost touch with the culture. And so then, we're just trying to make up rules based on what we think is right and what makes us feel good, versus thinking about this from a meta perspective and being like, all right, let's zoom out and think about like what is good for society and what is good for, society in the long run, rather than like, okay, what makes us feel good today? It's like, yeah, if we accept everyone for whoever they are, and like, even if they are lazy and fat and don't want to get their shit together, I think, I don't know, like it just leads to very bad places.
Yeah. And, maybe it's, to some extent, it's the emergence and growth of cultural Marxism and postmodern ideology, right? Because I think, 30 years ago, whether it was true or not, I think most people would agree that there was a common standard for beauty. And some people would fit that and some people would not fit that, and certain cultures might fit it more than others. And so I think maybe there would be some valid criticism to say that there should not be just one standard of beauty. Okay, fine. But then the leap beyond that would be that now there's actually zero standards of beauty. Everybody's beautiful. And I think that this pairs very well with the growth of the self-esteem movement and the increase in hedonism within our culture. Because if you have a population that simply cannot be confronted with reality and you want to sell things to them, you can't tell them the truth. You need to lie to them. And so that's kind of what I think is going on.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think we've, as a society, become very soft, by removing things that make us feel like, I think a lot of these things, like, okay, having standards, for example, when those standards are there, people feel insecure about themselves if they're not meeting those standards.
Right.
And so rather than owning up to that insecurity and being like, this is an area of my self-development that I have to work on, it's like, all right, let's just pretend that this is bullshit and we shouldn't do any of this. And then we just degrade. And so I think people just have lost the ability to deal with their own insecurities in some way.
Yeah.
And become just very soft.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, probably, you could say a lot of things are leading to that, but, maybe some extent is, even the emergence of a fiat dollar could be tied to it, because this is a complex issue. And so basically, before 42 years ago, when the US government had its currency backed in gold, we couldn't just infinitely fund a lot of these social initiatives. There was some sort of constraint in terms of, financing. Consumer debt was much lower. It wasn't common for people to carry massive credit card balances. And so I think as our, cultural, proclivity towards, fiscal restraint, is becoming removed, what that means is there's a delay in terms of the realization of the effects of one's behavior. And when there's a delay in that, it just becomes easier to lie to yourself.
Yeah. And then like the reality will come and hit you in the face when things are not so rosy. I think because we have so many protections in society today that keep us safe, but things like that, things always don't exist in an orderly fashion like they have in the last X number of decades. Mm-hmm. There are periods of chaos, and when chaos happens is when you start to realize like all your weaknesses come to surface because you have to deal with them. I mean, I think that's what 2020 taught you, right?
Well, I think it's true, but when there is such a strong delay between action and consequence, what that means is when you face the consequences of your actions, you're actually more likely to continue to misdiagnose them, and blame them on somebody else. And so I think that's, that is a little bit of what we saw last year. It's like with, Trump derangement syndrome, something like that. It's like, how many people's lives were basically not impacted by Trump in a meaningful way, but just lived every day hating him. In my view, that is, essentially a transposition of some other, insecurity or unmet accomplishment in their lives, that, it needs to come out somewhere, and very rarely is it going to come looking in the mirror. So, you just need to present these people with some other viable excuse, and they will continue believing, their own, constructed narrative about reality.
Yeah. And then getting into sort of dad bods, I'll just share sort of what I've observed about dad bods, and then you can share your theory on why the dad bods are becoming like mainstream and acceptable. Sure. It's just like really sad. Like, I think like I've met a lot of women who are like in their early or mid 20s or even late 20s who are trying to date for marriage or even just date. And they just find that the pool of men is just like continuing to decline. Mm-hmm. And like a lot of men just don't take care of themselves. They have dad bods. And previously that would be a major turnoff. But I think you're starting to see that women are just accepting that this is how it is. Mm-hmm. And if they want to get married and have like a family, they just have to accept the fact that they're going to have a dad bod boyfriend or husband. And as a result, like there's no motivation for these dudes to, I guess, like fix their dad bods. And then I don't know, like to me, I think the reason I find it sad is because like when you look around, it's just not, it's like you want to see like when you see beauty in the world, it's very like you feel a lot of hope. Mm-hmm. When you look around and you see dad bods, to me, that just shows me that it's like a society that doesn't give a shit about itself. And either that or they've just been so programmed by society into all of these bad habits that they almost don't even know how to get out of their own dad bod. So
tell us how you really feel, Preeti.
I'll end my dad bod rant there. But
so I actually have something that's possibly helpful to add on top of that, which is my experience in the dating market. And so I think that if I'm meeting various women, not every woman's going to find me to be attractive, which is like normal. But the ones who do, and particularly the ones who do, say in the upper half of those who do, they can't actually imagine other women not finding me attractive. And so, let's just say my superfan segment is instantly somewhat insecure when they see me. And my experience working in Silicon Valley with, women who are making six figures, good jobs, smart, all that, is when women adopt roles, societal roles, daily functions that more similarly resemble, traditional male roles, then their desires in mates will start to more slowly resemble traditional male desires in mates, meaning I think women now, compared to 20 years ago, are going to be more interested in dating younger men than them, more docile men than them that allow them to be in control in the relationship. I think they're more likely to, in some sense, pick men that won't leave them. And so, I think the glorification of a dad bod, isn't just, put out there to make men feel better about themselves, but to echo on what you said, to make women, actually feel better about their own, choices that are commonly made out of a place of insecurity.
Yeah, I think it definitely goes both ways, because I think like if you sort of succumb to a dad bod, I guess you're sort of lowering your own standards in a way, rather than saying like, I like, for example, like I take care of myself. So like I deserve this thing, and having that sense of like, I guess like, what's the right word? Having that sense of like wanting to seek something better. And then I'm just trying to think about this out loud psychologically. But yeah, I think that makes sense in the sense that like, if you aren't doing that, it probably means that you do kind of are seeking some level of control by being with someone who's not as good looking as you, for example.
I think that's a thing. That's really a thing where, and just like when you're hiring an employee for a role or you're applying for a job yourself, there's a reason why companies don't like hiring overqualified candidates, because they'll leave them fast and they'll leave them in a way that is not profitable for them to hire. And so, that concept for most people is foreign, because most people believe, and probably truthfully believe, that if they're turned down, it's because they lack something that another, say, job candidate has, or they don't, what does she see in him? Or, I know why she's dating that guy. But when you realize that both in hiring and in dating, most people are looking for qualified but not overqualified candidates, or at least many people are looking for highly qualified but not overqualified candidates for the fear of what these overqualified candidates might do to them. I think that would explain what we're seeing, at least in part.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a question. How do you lose a dad bod?
You want to take it, Preeti?
I think this is a male question, so
it probably is, but we'd have the same answer. Yeah. So how do you lose a dad bod?
How do you,
lifting weights,
fix your diet.
Lifting weights and eating protein dominant real food is probably the two paths to get there. If you go on Twitter, I have
ideally
my training
both.
plan. Yeah.
And not drinking a lot of beer either.
Yeah. And, most people don't actually drink that much. This is something that's surprising me, when I'll talk to people who are interested in working with me one-on-one, especially like the high stress professions, the lawyers and stuff like that. I just kind of assumed they were all alcoholics, and like very few of them actually drink that much. But a lot of dads do drink beer. I think a beer gut is different than a dad bod, because a beer gut's probably about 20 pounds more than a dad bod. So the dad bod's like an intermediate step. It's like what the frat boy becomes when he doesn't go to the gym more than 4 times a month and continues living frat boy lifestyle for the next 15 years and has a couple kids. It's like, so the guys, I think a dad bod's probably like 18% body fat or something like that. It's not obese, and it might not even be clinically overweight. It's just suboptimally attractive, by conventional standards.
Yeah. I think like we've talked about like how to get healthy in previous things. So I highly recommend you check a lot of that out. But I mean, how do you lose a dad bod? I think it's obvious. You fix your lifestyle. There's no other way. The only reason you have, I guess, okay, maybe the way to frame this question is like, why do you have a dad bod in the first place? Right. Yeah. It's probably because you let go of your health and you started to eat poorly, and you started to stop moving and stop exercising and live a very sedentary lifestyle. So if you reverse that, then your dad bod is also reversed.
Yeah. Now, that's a sensible explanation for people who've been active for most of their lives, like you and me, Preeti. But I think it's important to take into account the fact that there is a decent percentage of the population that was really never physically active, but still wasn't fat when they were younger. And so fitness might be a little bit more confusing for these people, and they might be more likely to attribute their decline to like genetics or something like that, because they may have never actually had to work hard to be in okay shape when they were younger. And all of a sudden, as they've gotten older, now they have to. And so now it's like, it's not easy for them to diagnose what's specifically wrong with their lifestyle, because they didn't actually know it was right when things seemed to be going okay. And so, one way to try to understand how your lifestyle is different from when you could eat whatever you wanted without getting fat, think about what you ate when you ate whatever you wanted without getting fat. And I'm not talking about like the serious, grotesquely large meals that you might have thrown down as a sophomore in high school. I'm talking about what did you normally eat on normal days? What did you normally do after school on normal days? So like most people at my high school would have played a sport at the varsity level, probably at least half. And whether they played that sport or not, if they were drinking, they were maybe drinking a few beers a couple times a week, with the exception of certain sports teams that did more than that more frequently. But for the most part, and it paired with their increase in training, so they're not going to get fatter from doing that. But for the most part, most high school kids, at least when we were in high school, but pictures suggest that might not be true today. But most high school kids who are like now in their 30s, they led much healthier lifestyles than the typical working professional in their 30s. They were probably not as sleep deprived. They probably consumed a lot less alcohol, even if when they did consume it, it was in binge fashion. And they probably ate less restaurant food. They did not go to happy hours. So, despite you thinking like, oh, when I was younger, I could eat whatever I wanted and I would never gain weight. Be honest with yourself in terms of the frequency of those events. They might have only happened like once a month. And frankly, if you're mostly living a healthy lifestyle now, you can probably do the same thing once a month without noticing much of an adverse effect.
Yeah. How often do you put starch and pasta in your meals? I don't eat pasta, so I just don't even like it. So 0 for that for me. Starches, it's something I've experimented with. And, the only forms of starch that I actually like are like banana and potato. Besides that, I don't really eat very starchy food. I guess like a lot of vegetables. Some vegetables have a lot of starch in it. But I'm actually currently experimenting with going no starch or very little starch. And I kind of feel a little bit better from like a less fiber point of view. So I think like for me, it fluctuates. For pasta, nothing. Starch, even if I have it, I'll have like maybe 1 to 2 servings in a day. And I don't have starch in every meal because that would just bloat me up too much. Like starch makes you full. So I don't like that feeling that much.
Yeah, I put carbs in most of my meals, kind of depending on what my goals are. So if you guys have read my eating framework book, 10 Easy Wins for Easier Fat Loss, you can probably get the link in my Twitter bio. Traditionally, for the last several years, I would only eat carbs and starch, and I'll use them interchangeably at the level that I craved. And so basically, the goal was to eat as few as possible without like feeling like I was depriving myself. And so what that meant at the time was, I'd probably eat about 1 gram of carbs per pound of body weight, but it would just go by my intuition. It wasn't like, okay, I need to eat this amount. It was just like, okay, I actually happen to eat about the same amount every day when I eat intuitively. Over the last year, I've transitioned from, I would say, a combination of strength and aesthetics training to more dominantly strength training. And so what that means is I'm lifting heavier weights. And it's really, really uncomfortable to go through intense lower body lifting sessions with insufficient carbs in my system. So, what that means, because I'm squatting most weeks, sometimes twice a week, I'm deadlifting most weeks, and I'm doing my working sets, heavy. My top working set during squats last week was 400. My working sets in deadlifts is 400 and something pounds. And so if I don't have starch in almost all my meals, I'm also putting myself at injury risk because I'm not going to have the energy to execute those lifts that require technical proficiency. So I'm more flexible with my carbs now. My body fat's gone up over the last year, but it's not high. I mean, it may have gone up 1% in the last 12 months or so, which is probably okay, particularly with coronavirus and what we didn't know about the effects of it. I probably didn't want to be as lean as I was last year at the onset of a unquantifiable pandemic. And so, I'm kind of like steady state around 1% higher than I was last year. It hasn't really moved in the last several months. So that's kind of where I think my body's going to be when I power lift.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing, which is that, especially for women, I think carb intake, everybody's different. And so I've been sort of going down the whole carnivore rabbit hole, for example, and I've noticed that every woman has different experiences. So some women absolutely thrive on carnivore. And the only way they thrive is if they get really high fat percentages.
So because they're not eating enough.
Basically you need your energy from either carbs or fat. Like your body's not going to use protein. I mean, if you do try to get it from protein, you're just going to starve basically. But so I think there is no really right answer of like how much carbs versus fat I think you should have on your diet. I think it just depends on you experimenting with your body and seeing where you feel best, meaning like you have energy, you can think clearly, you don't feel deprived. And so even myself, like I continue to experiment with carb versus fat. Like right now I'm going a much higher fat and lower carb just for this month, just to experiment to see how I feel. So I would highly just recommend experimenting. That's the only way to know what will work with your body, because everyone that you ask will tell you a different answer of what's right. And you won't know until you actually go out and try yourself.
And, we probably touched on this before, but one of the benefits of training at a high level is that you don't make tremendous gains workout to workout. And you might think, well, what's the benefit of that? Well, the benefit of it is it allows you to A/B test lifestyle and diet changes a lot easier. So for most people, if they just start a workout plan, kind of like irrespective of how their lifestyle changes are, they're going to make progress in that workout plan for the first few months, 4 months, 6 months. That workout was unusually good. And these are the things that I did differently the day before. Whereas if you've been training as long as Preeti and I have, most of our workouts are going to be probably B-level workouts. And we kind of know how much weight we can lift in B-level workouts. And so for me, if I can lift an extra single rep on a set that I couldn't lift the week previously, so if I go from being able to do, say 3 reps at 400 pounds 1 week to 4 reps at 400 pounds 2 weeks later, or 3 reps at 415 pounds 2 weeks later, that's a meaningful difference for me. And so when I experience those meaningful changes, I can just go back and say, okay, what was different? Whereas when you're constantly making those gains, you can't match the performance changes to the lifestyle changes.
Yeah. How often do you recommend to work out in a week? It's a good question. And I think it really depends on a lot of things, right? How much time do you actually have to work out? Like if someone gave you a program where you had to work out 6 days a week, could you even do it? Do you even have the time? And so you have to first figure out like how many days of the week can you actually work out? Because I can tell you, you got to work out 6 days a week. Like that's it. Like go hard, and like you might not even be able to do it. So first figure out how many you can actually put in. And then once you figure that out, you can sort of lay out a plan. But I would say minimum 3, if you're strength training. But I've seen people go as high as like 5-6 days a week for strength training, just depending on how they structure their layouts, and at least having a few like days that are not as hard as the other days. But I've noticed that for me, what works best is having 3 hard days. And then the other days I stopped strength training. The other days I just do other stuff like dance or, Pilates. So yeah, I reduced my strength training to 3 days a week, and it actually works better for me because I recover a lot better now.
Yeah. And I'm the same way. I'll do 3 heavy strength days a week and then 2 lighter strength days a week. I do mobility every day, no matter if I'm strength training or not. I was trying to think of an equation to back into to determine what your exercise threshold should be. And I'm not doing a tremendous job of it, but I think, possibly, something like, the number of hours you sleep per night times like 0.7 should be, maybe the amount of time you could target, in doing some form of like somewhat intense training in a week. Because it is going to very much index to how well you're recovering, right? How much are you sleeping? Yeah. How well are you eating? How old are you? I can tell you when I was 18 years old, the summer before I went to Vanderbilt to, on a baseball scholarship, I was lifting weights like 10 hours a week. And that was too much for me at 18. I was still getting results, but that was too much for me at that age. So for me as a 19-year-old Division I athlete, probably 6 hours of strength training per week was it was optimal to maybe slightly too much. And that was, when I was basically in the prime of my athletic training life cycle. So, if 6 hours per week of lifting weights at 19 was like kind of maximal, and I would still get pretty good results if I was only doing it, say, 3 or 4 hours a week. You can drop like a half hour a week for every 10 years you are older than that. And, that's probably not a bad place to think about it.
Yeah. He says he's 18 and I can try to work out every day, but I don't know how good it is for my body. You'll know. I think you just have to get really good at being in tune with your body. If your body hurts, then you know, and you're not recovering and you're feeling excessively sore or tired, then yeah, you're probably overdoing it. And so I think you have to figure out by trying out, maybe start with 3 days a week and see like, all right, how do I feel? Do I still have energy at the end of the week if I do 3 days a week?
And I think,
yeah.
Yeah. And sorry to cut you off, but, I think particularly with people who've had eating disorders, my recommendation would be to, as well as for people who don't have those, but particularly for people who have had eating disorders, my recommendation would be towards performance-oriented training. So the goal is not a number of days per week. The goal is not a number of calories burned per week. The goal is to set tangible growth metrics. I want to get this much stronger. I want to be able to execute this amount of pounds at this lift. I want to be able to run this distance at this speed. Because when you start setting performance goals, and you'll realize if you're trending upwards or downwards towards them, and if you're trending downwards towards them, you have a very clear signal that you're probably doing it too much. If you're doing it consistently and you're trending downwards, that's your body telling you it's too much. Whereas, most people who are new to training programs, they just want to get volume in and show up, which is important. You do need to show up in order to make progress. But, particularly, people who have some sort of like obsessive, disorders that they're getting over these, that's the same type of mindset that can immediately transfer into like some sort of exercise disorder. So you want to make sure that your training program is structured with that in mind. So you're less likely to revert to, basically similar negative habits, but applied at the gym.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely identify with that. I used to be in that camp where I used to apply I wouldn't say I had an eating disorder, but I was incredibly, controlling with my food. And I applied that with my gym. And like you said, volume is the way you compensate in the same way. And by going a more performance route, like you're saying, like having metrics that I'm targeting, that allowed me to realize that it doesn't really matter how many minutes or how much volume I do in the gym. It's like, am I actually getting stronger? Am I getting better at this or not? Like that's the measure. And so then you completely tailor your training to make sure that you're meeting those goals. Completely changes how you think about fitness.
And I see she said that she had an exercise disorder before an eating disorder. Yeah. So I think, and Preeti and I have touched on this in prior segments, but it's really important to not view training as a punishment of yourself. And that's really challenging because as a young kid, a lot of your activities are geared towards rewards and punishments. And this doesn't really change as you get older. But a lot of people develop the habit, when they're younger of the more I punish myself, the better I will be. And, you probably need to talk to like developmental psychologists to better explain why that feeling exists. But the way it manifests itself is, people getting into professions that essentially work them to the bone and they feel okay about that, or controlling their eating in an unhealthy way, or exercising too much. And so really the underlying issue for a lot of those people is the belief that an increase in self-punishment will relate to an increase in self-worth. And it does take a while to kind of pivot away from that sort of mindset and to start seeing training more as an input-output mechanism where you will not get better simply by punishing yourself more. You need to train an amount that your body can sustain and grow from. And that's how you will gain worth. And that's how you will gain health.
Yes, well said. Is running compatible with weightlifting? You can do both at the same time, as long as it depends on what type of running you're doing. If you're lifting and then going for a 10-mile run or even a 5-mile run, there's probably chances that you could enter catabolic states at that point, and you're kind of defeating the purpose of weightlifting. It depends on how much you're running. For me, for example, if I'm just looking to warm my body up, I'll go for a mile jog and I'll just feel good. I'll have like all the endorphins running through my body, and then I'll do my lift, and that doesn't really affect my muscle gains. But I used to make the mistake of going really hard on the cardio and then lifting, and that was just completely counteracting the whole point of me building muscle. Because, think about it, like if you're running for long distances, your body naturally doesn't want to hold on to weight. So it doesn't want to hold on to fat or muscle or whatever. But the purpose of weightlifting is you want to build muscle, you want to gain density. And so it's just like you're kind of confusing the body at that point. So it just depends. As long as you're very mindful about how much running you're doing with the weightlifting, it's totally fine. I think sometimes the fitness community overhypes the whole like, oh, you're going into a catabolic state if you just like do this. If you do cardio, you're going to go into a catabolic state. It's like, no, it just depends on how much. You can do a little bit of cardio and be fine.
And, my experience with that is I always ran a lot. A lot, not compared to a runner, but for a lifter, I ran a lot. I still do more conditioning than most people who are doing powerlifting, which I think is why I'm leaner than most powerlifters. What I noticed is that it was always okay when I was doing my squats and deadlifts, in like the low 300 range for squats and deadlifts, like below 400 for my working sets. And I could run, I do my intervals. So, that meant running maybe a mile worth of intervals a day, a few days a week or something like that. As I've started to increase my weight to where I'm doing squats in the mid 400 range or mid 300 range now, and deadlifts in the mid 400 range now, I can't actually run the way that I could last year. It's just putting too much compression on my knees. And so from that standpoint, if I'm having joint issues, I don't want to exacerbate those joint issues by overloading the workload on my knees in this case. And so what I'm doing is I'm just doing assault biking now, because assault biking is very joint friendly. It's just as hard as running. It gives me the same physique impact as running does, but it just doesn't add additional joint compression. So I think when you're constructing a program, it's important to be able to quantify the amount of skeletal and joint stress that is coming from all different components of the program. Most people, if they run an amount that most people run, and it's like on a track or outdoors but not on pavement, and they lift weights at normal people levels and prior injury histories. So let's see, getting crazy leg cramps at night after working out, I get those too.
Salt.
Salt.
Make sure you're having enough salt, electrolytes. There's these there's these tablets called Noon. Those are the easiest way to just get electrolytes. Pop a few in your water, and it'll fix all the cramps. Like salt fixes a lot of that.
And zinc and magnesium too.
Yeah, that too.
As well as, I don't eat that many vegetables. And actually, Preeti, I'm curious, over the next month as you phase them out of your diet, the only thing that I do notice from a beneficial standpoint of consuming some degree of vegetables is it does seem to alleviate cramps for me.
Do you think it's the vegetables or the salt that you put in vegetables?
I don't really. I just eat like spinach or like vegetable juice, so there's no added sodium to it. So my vegetables will have less salt per gram than my meat, so I could actually be consuming less salt, when I do consume more vegetables. But I have noticed that it does seem to alleviate cramps for me when I have at least some degree of vegetables in my diet.
Interesting. I've never heard of that. Does running make you skinny? Depends on your diet. So running burns calories. And if you're eating less calories than you're burning, then you will lose weight. But you've probably seen plenty of runners who aren't skinny, who kind of actually look skinny fat. And so I don't think it makes you skinny in the right way, even if it does for a lot of people. And yeah, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think specifically to, for people who've had eating and exercise disorders, I would strongly advise against a framework of looking at fitness as like skinny versus fat. Because, as you get in better shape, the concept of being skinny isn't even like a thing, right? Yeah. There's not that many people who have healthy relationships with their diet and exercise plans who will tell you that my fitness goal is to get skinny, right? They'll tell you that my goal is to get stronger, my goal is to get more flexible, my goal is to get faster, my goal is to be able to do this particular movement this many times or something like that. But almost none of them will say my goal is to be skinny. So I think to reverse engineer, even the formulation of that question, that asking that question in and of itself is suggestive of, the propensity to develop or maintain an unhealthy relationship with diet and exercise.
What's a good rest time if I'm doing relatively quick 400-meter intervals? You should take that.
Yeah, so I've gone anywhere from 30 seconds to for a 400-meter interval, like 75 seconds. So anywhere from about half to about the full length of what it takes to complete that interval. That's what my rest period's, probably going to be. So I was extremely lean, like near my leanest. I was running 400-meter intervals with a 30-second break in between. And I would only do 4 of them because I just seemed like I got really good benefits only doing 4. That's the minimum. I think it would be incredibly difficult if I were to try to do that right now. And I think, I have basically the same results if I'm going to, take twice as long. So, anywhere from 30 to 75 seconds, I think is fine.
You said that's a really good answer.
Yeah.
Okay. So we started with Dad Bods and fat acceptance, and then we moved into a lot of health and fitness stuff.
Yeah.
Anything else that we want to say for this week? Oh yeah, I will share sort of how I feel after these 30 days of going mostly animals. So last week I was eating fruit and honey and dairy and cheese and eggs. This week I'm still eating fruit and honey because I need some source of carbs for my workouts, but I'm trying out cutting out dairy and eggs just for like 2 weeks.
Interesting. So, yeah. You might be quite thin. It's going to be hard for you to replace those calories, like eating intuitively, unless you're intentionally trying to replace them.
I'm going to intentionally eat. I'm just putting a lot of fat. That's the thing. That's the only way I can get enough calories. And I think it's not easy. It's not that hard for me to put in fat. Like you just, for example, bone broth. Bone broth has like all that tallow in it. So
you make your bone broth with the bone marrow. I prefer to eat the marrow first, but I'm still getting the fat from eating the marrow. So.
Yeah, so there's a lot in that. I've been like buttering the shit out of my steaks, eating all the beef trimmings and stuff. Lamb has fat?
Lamb's super fat. Like
really?
My challenge when I'm eating grass-fed beef is it's a lot leaner. Yeah, it's like even if I get a ribeye cut, a corn-fed ribeye cut's like very fatty, but a grass-fed ribeye cut's typically not. And so, the only way that I've found I've been able to get, sufficient fat, unless I'm eating bone marrow, and I haven't had much delivered recently. So I haven't had bone marrow in a few weeks, but lamb has a ton of fat in it, lamb ribs. And so, if I'm trying to eat 1,200 calories of meat in a sitting, lamb ribs are a good way to get there.
Yeah. Interesting. I'll check out lamb. I haven't tried that.
If anybody has content.
Oh yeah. The other thing I am going to try adding is rice. Because last night, for example, I was craving it and I was like, okay, that's probably my body saying like, you need a little bit more carbs.
Yes.
So I'm gonna probably cycle in rice and stuff. But yeah, the experiment is mostly just to get rid of a lot of plants, nuts, and seeds. Because I used to eat a lot of them, especially nut butter. So I was obsessed with nut butter.
Mention that.
And I just like, and I've done that for years. I've done that since I was like 16, basically. I ate nut butter every single day. So, I have a feeling that's not good in the long run.
Who knows?
So I'm just trying to see how I feel. Anyways, I'll keep you guys posted. So hopefully this was a good session. So thanks to everyone who joined.
Thanks for tuning in.
Someone said they want more crypto content. I think Instagram is the wrong place for that, but I'll do that in other places.
Maybe we'll save room for like one crypto question this session.
Yeah, we should.
Maybe
we should.
like one, and then everything else is going to be fitness oriented.
We should totally do that.
Yeah, just get a little bit bigger audience or something.
Yeah, probably. All right.
Bye, guys. Thanks for tuning in.